they threw him in with the feral alien girl. Days later, they found her cuddled up on his chest. Adrian woke to the taste of copper and the high-pitched whine of damaged hearing. His skull throbbed where the stun blast had caught him, and for a moment he couldn't remember which way was up. The deck beneath him was cold, smooth metal that pulled heat from his skin. He rolled onto his back, blinking against the uniform white light, and took inventory. Ribs bruised but not broken, left shoulder wrenched, hands zip-tied in front of him, with something that felt like braided wire. The cell was maybe 3 meters square, no windows. One wall held what looked like an observation panel, dark now but probably one-way glass. The air smelled wrong, recycled through systems that used different scrubbers than human ships, leaving a faint metallic aftertaste. He wasn't alone. Something moved in the far corner, a shape folded into the shadows. Adrian went still, his breath catching. The shape didn't unfold or approach. It just sat there, motionless, except for the barely perceptible rise and fall of breathing. "Hey," Adrian said. His voice came out rougher than he expected. "You awake?" No response. Adrian pushed himself up to sitting, ignoring the spike of pain through his shoulder. His cargo hauler was gone, probably debris by now, scattered across the approach to the fringe colonies where the Karathi patrol had caught him. 3 years running supplies to the outer settlements, and he'd known it would end like this eventually. The door panel chimed. Adrian turned as it slid open, revealing a Karathi guard. The alien was taller than Adrian by half a head, its skin a mottled olive green. The guard's eyes were large and yellow, pupils slitted vertically, and its ears rose to points from the sides of its skull, swiveling independently. It wore armor that looked grown rather than forged. Organic plates fitted seamlessly over its torso. "Human," the guard said in heavily accented standard. "You are fortunate, you live with Broken One." It gestured toward the shape in the corner. "She kill last 3 cellmate. Maybe you last longer, maybe not." The guard's laugh was a chittering sound that set Adrian's teeth on edge. It tossed something through the door, a ration pack that hit the floor and slid, and then the panel sealed again. Adrian stared at the ration pack, then at the corner. The shape still hadn't moved. "So," he said after a moment, "guess we're stuck together." Silence. Adrian worked his bound hands until he could tear open the ration pack. Inside was a protein bar that smelled like burnt vegetation and a sealed pouch of water. He drank half the water slowly, then set the protein bar aside. Whatever was in it probably wouldn't kill him, but he'd wait until hunger outweighed caution. He slid the water pouch across the floor toward the corner. It stopped a meter from the shape. "Not poisoned," Adrian said. "Already drank from it." The shape moved. Not much, just a slight shift of weight, but Adrian saw it clearly now. A head lifted and eyes caught the light. Yellow-green, luminous, set in a face that was startlingly humanoid despite the pointed ears that lay flat against the skull. The skin was a deep, vibrant green like new leaves in spring. Black hair fell forward, tangled and unkempt. She stared at him. Her ears didn't move from their flattened position. Her hands were visible now, long fingers ending in claws that were extended just enough to catch the light. "Take it or don't," Adrian said, gesturing to the water. "But I'm not going to hurt you, and I'm not going to take it back." He turned away deliberately, settling against the opposite wall with his back to the corner. It was a calculated risk, but he'd learned that sometimes the best way to disarm someone was to prove you weren't a threat. Minutes passed. Adrian focused on breathing through the pain in his shoulder, counting seconds. Somewhere past 300 he heard movement, a whisper of fabric against metal, the soft pad of bare feet. When he glanced back, the water pouch was gone. The figure had retreated to the corner again, but her posture had changed. Her ears weren't quite as flat. She held the pouch in both hands, watching him over it with those unsettling yellow-green eyes. "Adrian," he said, tapping his chest with bound hands, "that's my name." She didn't respond, but her ears shifted forward slightly. "I was running medical supplies to the colonies," Adrian continued, keeping his tone conversational. "Got intercepted about 6 hours out from Perimeter Station. They wanted to know about resistance movements, supply routes. Told them I just fly the ship and mind my business, which is mostly true." He paused. "Well, mostly." The alien female tilted her head, a distinctly predatory gesture. Her eyes never left his face. "You understand me," Adrian said. "It wasn't a question." Her ears swiveled forward completely, and for just a moment, something flickered across her expression. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. Adrian leaned his head back against the wall, closing his eyes. "Guess you'll tell me if you want to, or not. Either way, we're stuck here together." He didn't expect a response, but when he opened his eyes again an hour later, the alien female was still watching him, and her claws had retracted completely. The first day passed in silence. Adrian talked intermittently about his route, about the colonies he'd visited, about the way stars looked from the pilot's seat when you were far enough out that navigation beacons became suggestions. He didn't ask questions, didn't push, just filled the silence with words that required nothing from her. She listened. He could tell by the way her ears oriented toward him, by the subtle shifts in her posture. When the guard brought another ration pack, Adrian repeated the ritual, drank first, then slid the water across the floor. This time, she took it while he was still watching. Her movements were fluid, precise, nothing wasted. She drank without breaking eye contact, then set the empty pouch down carefully. "Thank you," she said. Adrian froze. Her voice was lower than he expected, melodic despite its alien cadence. The words were standard, accented but clear. "You're welcome," he managed. She didn't say anything else, but she didn't look away either. They sat like that, and something passed between them that wasn't quite trust, but wasn't quite fear either. It was a beginning. On the second day, she moved closer. Not much, just enough that she was no longer pressed into the corner. Adrian took it as a victory. "Got a name?" he asked while they shared the morning ration. She considered the question for a long time, her ears shifting through small adjustments. Finally, she spoke. "Saris." "Saris," Adrian repeated, testing the syllables. "That's a good name." Her ears lifted slightly, and the corner of her mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close enough. By the third night, the nightmares found him. Adrian woke gasping, his bound hands clutching at nothing, the echo of his ship's death scream still ringing in his ears. For a moment he didn't know where he was, just knew that the hull was breaching, that he was going to die in vacuum. Then he felt eyes on him. Adrian turned his head and found Cirrus sitting closer than she'd ever been, maybe an arm's length away. Her head was tilted, ears pricked forward, and in the dim light her yellow-green eyes seemed to carry their own luminescence. Neither of them spoke. Adrian's breathing gradually slowed, and Cirrus didn't move, just sat there like a sentinel. When he finally closed his eyes again, he could still feel her presence. Not threatening, not exactly comforting, but there. Solid. Real. Something had shifted between them. Adrian felt it in the way she no longer tracked his movements with predatory intensity, in the way her ears stayed oriented toward him even when she wasn't looking directly at him. He'd proven he could share a space without dominance or violence, and she'd proven she could let her guard down without being destroyed. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was the foundation on which trust could be built, and in a cell designed to strip away humanity, or whatever the Korathi equivalent was, that foundation was everything. By the fourth day, Saris was sitting close enough that Adrian could see the subtle variations in her green skin, darker along her forearms, lighter at her throat where the pulse of her heartbeat was visible. She watched him with less wariness now, her ears tracking his movements with curiosity instead of threat assessment. "Why did they call you broken?" Adrian asked, working at the frayed zip ties with his teeth. Cirrus's ears flattened slightly. She was quiet for so long that Adrian thought she wouldn't answer. "I refused a bonding, political arrangement. My father is Commander Vireth." She said the name like it tasted bitter. "Important man, powerful. He chose a mate for me. I said no." "And they locked you up for that?" "Among my people, refusal is instability, weakness. We do not choose bonds from emotion." Her fingers traced patterns on the metal floor, claws retracted. "I was marked as defiant. They said reconditioning would correct me." "Did it?" Cirrus looked at him directly, something fierce in her yellow-green eyes. "No?" "Good," Adrian said. Her ears lifted, swiveling forward. "Good?" Yeah, I've seen colonies hold together through hell because people cared about each other, seen others fall apart because nobody gave a damn. Your people might think emotions are weakness, but out here, caring about someone is what keeps you alive. Cirrus stared at him like he'd spoken in a language she'd never heard. Her ears trembled slightly. You are strange, she said finally. I've been told. The days blurred together after that. Adrian told Cirrus about the colonies, terraformed moons, markets where 15 species traded goods and insults, the satisfaction of delivering supplies to settlements that survived on hope and grit. She listened with an intensity that made him choose his words carefully. In return, Cirrus taught him words in her language. When he finally pronounced Kethrai, Starlight, correctly, her ears lifted completely and the corners of her mouth curved upward. Better, she said, and her voice carried warmth he hadn't heard before. On the 7th day, Adrian woke to find his shoulder hot and swollen. The skin around the joint was angry red, and when he tried to rotate his arm, pain lanced through him. Cirrus noticed immediately. Her ears snapped forward, and she moved to his side with fluid grace. Infected, she said. They will not treat you. Yeah, I figured. Adrian tried to smile through the pain. No. Cirrus began tearing strips from the hem of her ragged shift. I can help. She used their water ration to clean the strips, then wrapped them carefully around his shoulder, her touch surprisingly gentle. Her fingers were cool against his fevered skin, and Adrian found himself watching her face as she worked, the concentration in her eyes, the way her ears tilted forward. Thank you, he said when she finished. Cirrus settled beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. You gave me water when you did not have to. You spoke to me when I was meant to kill you. This is small repayment. Over the next 2 days, the fever worsened. Adrian drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of Cirrus's presence like an anchor. She kept the bandages clean, rationed water to keep him hydrated, and when the shaking got bad, she pressed her cooler hands to his forehead and neck. Once, delirious, Adrian mumbled something about his crew from the war, people he'd lost years ago. Cirrus didn't shush him. She just listened, her ears oriented toward him, and when he finally fell into exhausted sleep, he felt her fingers brush lightly through his hair. When the fever broke on the 3rd day, Adrian woke clear-headed to find Cirrus sitting beside him, her eyes half closed in rest. Her ears swiveled toward him the moment he stirred. Better? She asked. Yeah, thanks to you. Cirrus's ears lifted, and she looked away quickly, but not before Adrian saw the way her expression softened. They fell into new rhythms. Cirrus told him about Korathi culture, rigid hierarchies, collective strength over individual desire, the concept of keth that she struggled to translate. It meant something deeper than friendship, more fundamental than romantic love, a bond of absolute trust only sanctioned between specific pairs chosen by political necessity. But what about choosing for yourself? Adrian asked. Cirrus's ears drooped. That is not permitted. Personal choice leads to instability. She paused, her claws extending and retracting nervously. I used to believe it. And now? Now I think perhaps understanding cannot be commanded. She looked at him sidelong, her yellow-green eyes catching the light. Perhaps it must be discovered. Adrian held her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Tell me about where you would go, Cirrus said quietly. If you could leave here, if you were free. So Adrian painted pictures with words, stations in neutral space where humans and aliens mixed freely, asteroid settlements where the rules were made by whoever was toughest, the deep black between stars where you could fly for days without seeing another ship. Cirrus listened like she was memorizing every detail. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. I would like to see these places, she said finally. I think I would like to be somewhere that does not require me to be something I am not. If I find a way out of here, Adrian said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice, I'll take you with me. Cirrus went very still, her ears flattened against her skull. Why would you burden yourself with a fugitive, with the daughter of a commander who orders strikes against your people? Adrian met her eyes steadily. Because you're the only person who's bothered to see me as more than cargo. Because you sat with me when I had nightmares and didn't ask questions. Because you're not a burden. Cirrus's expression did something complicated. Her ears lifted and fell. Her eyes brightened with moisture. She blinked away quickly. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I would do the same. The cell door opened without warning. Adrian moved instinctively in front of Cirrus, but the guard wasn't alone. Behind him stood a Korathi male in formal military dress, his skin darker green than Cirrus's with ritual scars marking his pointed ears. Cirrus made a sound between a hiss and a gasp. Her ears flattened completely. Commander Vireth, the guard said. The commander stepped into the cell, his yellow eyes moving from Adrian to Cirrus. When he spoke, his voice was deep and measured. Cirrus, daughter, I had hoped the human would teach you humility. He paused, taking in their proximity. Instead, I find you compromised. Father. Cirrus's voice was flat, stripped of emotion, but Adrian could see the tension in her shoulders. Vireth turned his attention to Adrian. Do you know why you are here, human? Your presence serves two purposes. First, to provoke my daughter into another violent incident that would justify her execution. Second, to provide leverage. He tilted his head. There are those in the Empire who would prefer I support expansion into your colonies. They believe threatening my daughter will convince me. Adrian's stomach turned cold. He glanced at Cirrus, saw the way her ears trembled despite her controlled expression. She wasn't just a prisoner, she was bait. And will it? Adrian asked. Will you trade her life for a war? Something flickered in Vireth's eyes, grief maybe, or regret. I will do what strengthens the Empire, as I was trained, as she should have been. He looked at Cirrus again. You were meant to be strong, daughter, not this. I am strong, Cirrus said quietly, strong enough to refuse a life without choice, strong enough to survive what you allowed them to do to me. For a moment, the commander said nothing. Then he turned and left without another word, the guard following. Cirrus didn't move. She stood rigid, her breathing carefully controlled, her ears pressed flat. Adrian reached for her hand, and she flinched but didn't pull away. Cirrus, you know now, she said, her voice tight. You know whose daughter I am, what my father does, the colonies he has destroyed. She finally looked at him, and her yellow-green eyes were bright. You must hate me. Adrian tightened his grip on her hand. I don't hate you. I hate that they're using you like this. I hate that your own father would stand there and let it happen. He pulled her closer. But you? You're the person who sat with me in the dark, who took care of me when I was sick. How could I hate you for that? Cirrus stared at him, and something in her expression cracked. Her carefully maintained control shattered, and suddenly she was pressing her face against his chest, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs she'd probably been holding back for years. Adrian wrapped his arms around her, feeling the coolness of her skin, and held on while she broke apart. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were red-rimmed but clearer. She looked at Adrian like she was seeing him for the first time, and her hand came up to rest against his chest where his heart beat steady. I do not understand you, she whispered, but I think I am beginning to. Adrian covered her hand with his own, and neither of them moved until the lights dimmed for the sleep cycle. The days after Vireth's visit were different. Cirrus withdrew into herself, not with predatory wariness, but with something heavier, resignation. She sat with her back against the wall, knees drawn up, ears flat against her skull. Adrian didn't retreat. He sat close enough that she could feel his presence, and he talked about the things he'd seen, the good things. A sunrise on a water moon, ice crystals forming on viewports during deep space transit, a child laughing in a refugee camp despite having lost everything. Why do you tell me these things? Cirrus asked on the third day, her voice rough. Because you need to remember there's something worth surviving for. Her ears lifted slightly. You still believe we can survive this? I have to, because if I don't, then they've already won. Something shifted in her expression. Her ears rose further, and she uncurled from her defensive posture. You are either very brave or very foolish, she said. Probably both. The guards came for Adrian the next morning. 2 of them, moving with professional efficiency. When Ceres lunged forward with a snarl, they stunned her with a short burst that left her gasping on the floor. They dragged Adrian through identical corridors until they reached an interrogation room. Captain Jarrell was waiting, his dark emerald skin marked with scars, his eyes cold. The interrogation was methodical and brutal. Jarrell didn't ask many questions. Mostly he just hurt Adrian, testing limits, demonstrating control. Adrian gritted his teeth and focused on breathing, on staying conscious, on not giving them anything. By the time they dragged him back to the cell, Adrian was barely conscious, his ribs screaming with every breath, blood crusting on his face. The door sealed and he collapsed. Through the haze of pain he was aware of movement, Ceres, recovering from the stun, crawling toward him with urgency. Her voice was sharp with fear, hands hovering over him. "Adrian, look at me." He managed to open his eyes. Ceres's face swam into focus, her yellow-green eyes wide, her ears pressed forward in distress. "I'm okay," he tried to say, but it came out as a wheeze. "You are not okay." Ceres's hands were gentle as she checked him for serious injuries, her claws retracted. When she found the worst bruising along his ribs, she made a sound that might have been a growl or a whimper. "They did this to hurt me, to show me what happens when I care." "Not your fault," Adrian managed. "Yes, it is." Ceres pulled him carefully until his head rested in her lap, and her cool fingers brushed his hair back with tenderness. "Everything they do to you is because of me." Adrian caught her wrist, holding her hand against his cheek. "Ceres, listen to me." He had to pause to breathe through the pain. "I don't blame you." Her ears trembled and tears tracked down her green cheeks. She bent forward until her forehead pressed against his, her breath warm on his face. When the pain had dulled to something manageable, Adrian spoke again. "I need to tell you something about why they captured me." Ceres pulled back slightly, her ears tilting forward. "I wasn't just a cargo pilot. I was running intelligence for the Resistance. Fleet movements, supply chains, anything that could help the colonies defend themselves." He watched her face. "When your people boarded my ship, I surrendered. Could have fought, but there were colonists in range. If I'd resisted, your fleet would have hit them in retaliation." Ceres's expression didn't change. Her ears remained oriented toward him, attentive. "I chose to protect them instead of myself," Adrian continued. "You are a fool," Ceres said quietly. Then her hand came up to cup his bruised face, impossibly gentle. "A brave, stupid fool. Would you have done differently?" Ceres's ears drooped. "No, I would have done the same." She was quiet for a moment. "I have a confession also. I have been gathering information. Guard rotations, security protocols, ship layouts, everything I hear." Adrian stared at her. "Why?" "To sabotage the fleet. From within." Her yellow-green eyes held his steadily. "I was going to destroy what I could and die in the attempt." She leaned closer. "But now I think perhaps dying is not the only option. If we work together, your Resistance contacts, my knowledge of their systems, we could escape, get intelligence to your people that would prevent massacres." Adrian's mind raced despite the pain. It would be dangerous. "We are already dead," Ceres interrupted. "They will execute me when I am no longer useful. You they will interrogate until there is nothing left. We have nothing to lose." She was right. "Okay, we plan an escape. But Ceres, if we do this, you can't go back. Your people will consider you a traitor." "I know." Her voice was steady, but her ears trembled. "I have known this since the moment I decided to help you." Adrian reached up and traced the line of her jaw with his fingertips. "You sure about this?" Ceres turned her head and pressed a soft kiss to his palm. It was such a human gesture, and it made Adrian's breath catch. "I am certain," she said against his hand. "I would rather be in exile with you than honored and alone." Over the next days, they planned in whispers during sleep cycles. Ceres had memorized patterns. Guard changes happened every 8 hours with a 5-minute gap during shift overlap. The cell lock had a weakness she'd been exploiting, damaging the magnetic seal. The communications array was 3 levels up, accessible through maintenance conduits. Adrian contributed resistance protocols, emergency frequencies, authentication codes, drop points. Together they built a plan that was equal parts desperation and precision. "There is something else," Ceres said the night before their planned escape. Among my people, touch is significant. We do not touch casually. To place your hand on another's skin is to offer trust. Adrian looked at their hands resting together on the floor, fingers intertwined. I didn't know. I know. Ceres's ears lifted, her yellow-green eyes warm. That is why it matters. You have touched me without knowing what it meant, and I have allowed it. We have been building something without words. What does it mean, in your language? The closest word is kethmar, a bond chosen freely, despite custom or logic, a connection that defies what should be. She lifted their joined hands. Among my people, it is forbidden, but I find I do not care. Adrian brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, watching her ears swivel forward in surprised pleasure. Then we're both defying what should be. Might as well do it together. Ceres's smile was small but genuine, transforming her face to something achingly vulnerable. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his, and they stayed like that until the lights began their gradual brightening. Tomorrow they would risk everything, but tonight, in the darkness of their cell, they had each other. It was enough. The shift change came at 600 hours. Adrian counted seconds in his head while Ceres worked the damaged lock mechanism, her ears flat against her skull in concentration. Her fingers moved with precision, exploiting the weakness she'd spent weeks creating, and when the magnetic seal finally disengaged with a soft click, her ears snapped upright. Now, she whispered. They moved into the corridor during the 5-minute gap, Ceres leading with the fluid grace of a predator, her ears swiveling to track sounds Adrian couldn't yet hear. She'd memorized every turn, every junction, and she navigated them without hesitation. When footsteps approached from around a corner, she pressed them both flat against the wall, her hand covering Adrian's mouth, her body tense beside him. The guard passed without noticing. Ceres waited 10 heartbeats before moving again. The maintenance access was exactly where she'd described, a panel low on the wall that opened into cramped conduits barely wide enough for a human to crawl through. Adrian's ribs protested with every movement, but he gritted his teeth and followed Ceres through the darkness, trusting her memory of overheard conversations about ship layout. They emerged 3 levels up near the communications array. The room was small, filled with equipment that hummed with active power. Adrian moved to the main console while Ceres positioned herself by the door, her ears tracking sounds from the corridor beyond. Adrian's fingers flew across the interface, bypassing security protocols he'd learned years ago during his military service. The resistance frequency came up, and he began transmitting fleet positions, supply routes, weak points in Karathi defensive formations. Everything Ceres had gathered, everything he'd pieced together from observation and interrogation. Intelligence that could save thousands of lives. The alarm began shrieking halfway through the transmission. Adrian, Ceres said, her voice urgent. Almost done, 30 seconds. The door panel chimed. Ceres braced herself, and when it opened, Captain Jarrell stood in the entrance, flanked by 2 guards. His eyes widened when he saw Ceres, then narrowed with rage. Traitor, he snarled. Ceres moved like water, flowing forward with lethal intent. Her claws extended as she engaged Jarrell, and the fight was brutal and fast. She was smaller, but faster, using her knowledge of Karathi combat forms against him. The guards tried to intervene, but Ceres was everywhere at once, a green blur of controlled violence. Adrian kept working. 20 seconds. 15. He heard Ceres cry out and glanced back to see Jarrell's claws raking across her shoulder, leaving dark blood welling against green skin. Rage flooded through him, hot and immediate. He grabbed a piece of equipment, something heavy and metal, and swung it at Jarrell's head with every ounce of strength he had. The captain went down hard, and Ceres capitalized instantly, her claws finding vulnerable points with precision. Done, Adrian gasped, the transmission complete. We need to move. Ceres was bleeding, her shoulder torn, but she didn't slow. They ran through corridors as alarms screamed, following the route she'd planned to the docking bay. More guards appeared, and this time Adrian fought beside her, using training he'd thought he'd left behind. Every impact sent pain through his injured ribs, but adrenaline carried him forward. The docking bay was chaos. Ships secured in magnetic locks, personnel scrambling to respond to the breach. Cirrus made for a small shuttle at the far end, and Adrian followed, providing cover as she worked the access panel with blood-slicked fingers. The hatch opened. They threw themselves inside, and Cirrus took the pilot's seat, her hands moving across controls with desperate speed. The shuttle's systems came online with a whine of warming engines. Cirrus, the voice came through the comm system, deep and measured. Commander Vireth, daughter, if you leave now, you will be declared exile, stripped of name and status, forever severed from your people. You will be considered dead to us. Cirrus's hands stilled on the controls. Her ears trembled, pressing back against her skull. Adrian saw the pain in her yellow-green eyes, the weight of what she was about to lose. He reached over and covered her hand with his. You don't have to do this. We can still... No, Cirrus cut him off, her voice firm despite the tears tracking down her green cheeks. She turned to look at him, and in her expression he saw grief and determination in equal measure. I choose this. I choose you. She activated the comm, responding to her father in their language. The words were formal, final, and though Adrian didn't understand them all, he heard the goodbye in her voice. When she finished, she cut the transmission and launched the shuttle without waiting for a response. The escape was violent. Korathi interceptors pursued them, weapons fire lighting up the viewports. Cirrus piloted with reckless skill, her ears flat against her skull in absolute concentration, while Adrian managed failing systems, rerouting power as shields degraded under sustained assault. An interceptor got a solid hit on their port side. The shuttle lurched, alarms screaming, and Adrian smelled burning circuits. Cirrus compensated with a maneuver that should have been impossible, diving into the debris field from an old battle and using the wreckage as cover. There, Adrian said, pointing at his console. Resistance outpost. If we can reach the borderlands. I see it. Cirrus pushed the engines past safe limits, and the shuttle vibrated with the strain. Behind them, the interceptors were closing, but the neutral zone was coming up fast. The Korathi wouldn't cross that boundary without risking diplomatic incident. They crossed into Borderlands space with maybe 30 seconds to spare. The interceptors broke off pursuit, and Cirrus didn't slow until they were well into neutral territory, her hands shaking on the controls, her shoulder still bleeding. The outpost appeared on sensors, a collection of modules clustered around an asteroid, flying no flag, asking no questions. Cirrus brought them in for landing with the last of their fuel, and the shuttle settled onto a docking platform with a groan of stressed metal. For a moment, neither of them moved. They just sat in the cockpit, breathing hard, alive against all odds. We did it, Adrian said. Cirrus turned to him, her yellow-green eyes bright with tears and relief and loss. We did. Adrian reached for her, and she came willingly, careful of her injured shoulder. He held her, while she shook with reaction, pressing his face against her hair, feeling the coolness of her skin and the rapid beat of her heart. A voice crackled over the external comm. Unidentified shuttle, state your business. Adrian took the comm. This is Adrian Hess, former courier for the Resistance, requesting medical assistance and asylum. I have critical intelligence and a defector. There was a pause. Then, copy that, medical team is on approach. Welcome to Haven Station. Dr. Lena Kovac met them at the airlock, a compact woman with graying auburn hair and tired eyes behind scratched glasses. She took one look at Cirrus's shoulder and Adrian's bruised ribs and got to work without questions, treating them in a small medical bay that smelled of antiseptic and recycled air. The intelligence you transmitted, Lena said while cleaning Cirrus's wounds. It's already been authenticated. Command says it prevented an attack on Perimeter Station. Thousands of lives saved. Adrian felt Cirrus tense beside him. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together, and felt her grip tighten. What does this mean for her? Adrian asked, gesturing to Cirrus. Lena looked at Cirrus with something like respect. It means she's welcome here. We get a lot of people in the Borderlands who don't fit anywhere else. Deserters, refugees, exiles. Nobody asks too many questions. I am an exile, Cirrus said quietly, her ears drooping. I have no people, no place. Adrian squeezed her hand. You have me. Cirrus looked at him, and her expression was complex, grief for what she'd lost, but something else too. something that might have been hope. Lena finished bandaging Cirrus's shoulder and stepped back. You two look exhausted. There are quarters available on the residential level. Get some rest. We can talk more tomorrow. The quarters were small, a single room with a bed, basic facilities, and a viewport showing the stars. Adrian and Cirrus stood together at the window, looking out at the vast darkness scattered with light. I will never see my homeworld again, Cirrus said softly. Never hear my language spoken except in my own voice. I am severed from everything I knew. Adrian turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her uninjured shoulder. I know it hurts. I know what you gave up. But Cirrus, look at what you gained. Freedom, choice, the ability to be who you actually are instead of who they wanted you to be. And you, Cirrus added, her voice barely above a whisper. I gained you. Yeah, Adrian smiled despite everything. You're stuck with me now. Cirrus's ears lifted, swiveling forward, and she reached up to cup his face with both hands. Her touch was cool and gentle, and when she leaned in, Adrian met her halfway. Their kiss was tentative at first, testing this new intimacy, but it deepened with shared relief and need, and the bone-deep understanding that they had chosen each other despite impossible odds. When they finally pulled apart, Cirrus rested her forehead against his, their breath mingling in the small space between them. Kethmar, she whispered, that is what we are, a bond that should not exist but does. Then we'll make a life out of defying what should be, Adrian said. He took her hand and led her to the bed, and they lay down together, exhausted and wounded but together. Cirrus curled against his side, her head on his chest, her ears relaxed for the first time since he'd met her. Adrian wrapped his arms around her, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing, and looked out at the stars. They were exiles, both of them, cast out from their old lives, unwelcome in the worlds that made them. But here, in the borderlands between empires, they'd found something new. Not redemption or victory, but the quiet possibility of building a life on their own terms. Two prisoners who had found freedom in each other, two exiles who had become home.